Take my shoes off.
So Marjorie, do you want to start with
No,
what you've got? You don't like anything?
no.
Nothing.
Well,
Okay.
it's one of the world religions, so
Well, well, one thing we could maybe just pass on.
Wait, what did the other one? Did you close it?
I don't think so. I didn't mean to.
Yeah, it's not here. Just a sec, I just got to dig up the,
I didn't go into that at all. I did find the Newsweek article from years ago that I brought to an event that I did at the church, where they were talking about the hope that a lot of people felt for Sufism helping the Islamic world come to peace. I don't know, but when I look at maps of the region,
oh, there it is.
I just don't.
so this is our subject for tonight, Islam, and we're gonna break out a piece of it for Sufism, which looks remarkably like the mystic side of Judaism or the Kabbalists, which is amazing. So here we go. Islam.
I've been told on the QT, even my Kabbalah teacher admitted it, that they used to get together. And they definitely cross-pollinated. Nowadays, the Jews will say they got it all from the Sufis got it all from the Jews. But I think they got it from each other.
So we start with Islam, which in Arabic is translated into English as submission to the will of God, Islam. And this is, again, a monotheistic religion. It's centered on the Quran, the teachings of Muhammad, and the adherents, called Muslims, are up to 1.9 billion worldwide, second to the Christians. And they're the fastest growing major religious group in the world.
Wow.
So Muslims believe that Islam is complete and universal version of a primordial faith that was revealed many times to earlier prophets, the most important being Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, Isa. The Muslims consider the Quran to be the verbatim word of God, unaltered, final revelation. And alongside the Quran, Muslims believe in previous revelations such as the Torah from Hebrew, the Zabur, the Psalms, and the Gospels. So they believe that Muhammad is the main and final Islamic prophet through whom the religion was completed, and the teachings and normative examples of Muhammad, called the Sunnah, are documented in accounts called the Hadith, and they provide a constitutional model for Muslims. One of the problems with the Hadith is it's so-and-so says, I think I heard Muhammad say this. And so that's the nature of the documentation. Maybe Muhammad did say that. Who knows, So Islam teaches that Allah, or God, is one and incomparable. There'll be a final judgment where the righteous will be rewarded in paradise and the unrighteous will be punished in hell. The 5 pillars, or the obligatory acts of worship, comprise the Islamic oath and creed, the Shahada, the daily prayers, the almsgiving, fasting in the month of Ramadan, and a pilgrimage at least once in your life to Mecca. Islamic law, Sharia, touches on virtually every aspect of life, from banking and finance and welfare to men's and women's roles in the environment. Many people attack Sharia because they view it as a medieval set of laws that is really outmoded, but it's still there today. The two main religious festivals, Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. The three holiest sites in Islam are the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, the Prophet's Mosque in Medina, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, which is on top of this tabletop that's there. So the religion originated in Mecca around 610 AD, and the Muslims believe this is when Muhammad began receiving revelations, and by the time of his death, most of the Arabian Peninsula had converted to Islam, and then the rule expanded outside Arabia under the Caliphate, and subsequent caliphates ruled all the way from the Iberian Peninsula to the Indus Valley. One of the things to keep in mind is it was in 732 at Tours that the Western Europeans stopped the caliphate from coming in and taking over France, and then they would have just kept right on rolling and taken over everything. So they were bottled up at that point, and the person who led the charge doing that, his grandson became the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire in 800 AD. So it was a significant battle that was fought that stopped them. There was a golden age of Islam, probably around 900 to 1100 AD, and there was a renaissance and a scientific, economic, and cultural flourishing. The expansion involved all kinds of states and caliphates around the Mediterranean, going off into Persia, and there was a lot of trade and religious conversion as a result of the missionary activity, and then through these conquests. So it was quite a deal. There's two main branches of Islam: the Sunni Islam, which is the majority of the followers of Islam, 85 to 90%, and the Shia Islam, which is the remainder, 10 to 15%. There's a number of other small ones, but these two really dominate. So the Sunni and Shia split initially arose over disagreements over who is the successor to Muhammad, and then they grew to cover, even broader dimensions, and so it goes. So the Muslims make up a majority of the population in 49 countries in the world. There's about 200 or so countries in the world. So approximately 12% of the world's Muslims live in Indonesia, which is the most populous Muslim majority country. 31% live in South Asia, 20% in the Middle East and North Africa, and 15% in sub-Saharan Africa. And they're also present in the Americas and in China and Europe. So we come to the first concept of God. The central concept of Islam is Tawhid, the oneness of God. It's usually thought of as a precise monotheism, but it's also panentheistic in Islamic mystical teachings. So God is seen as incomparable and without partners, such as in the Christian Trinity, and associated partners to God, or attributing partners to God's attributes to others, is seen as what's called shirk, or idolatry. So God is transcendent of creation, is beyond comprehension. The Muslims are not iconodules, and they do not attribute any form to God. So God instead is described and referred to by several names or attributes, the most common being Ar-Haram, meaning the entirely merciful, and Ar-Rahim, meaning the especially merciful, which are invoked at the beginning of most of the chapters of the Quran. Islam teaches the creation of everything in the universe is brought into being by God's command, as expressed by the wording, be, and it is. And the purpose of existence is to worship God. God is viewed as a personal God. There are no intermediaries, no clergy that contact God. A consciousness and awareness of God is referred to as taqwa. Allah is a term with no plural or gender being ascribed to it, and is also used by Muslims and Arabic-speaking Christians and Jews in reference to God, whereas Ilah, which is a term used for the deity or God in general. So Allah.
That's that chant, La ilaha illallah.
Right.
There is no God but God.
There are angels. These are beings that are described in the Quran and the Hadith. They're created to worship God and serve in other specific duties, such as communicating revelations from God, recording every person's actions, and taking a person's soul at the time of death. They're described as being created variously from light, nur, or fire, nar. Islamic angels are often represented in anthropomorphic forms, combined with supernatural images such as wings, being of great size, or wearing heavenly articles. And common characteristics for angels include a lack of bodily needs, desires, such as eating and drinking. Some of them, such as Gabriel, Jibril, and Michael, Mikhail, are mentioned by name in the Quran. Angels play a significant role in literature, but the Miraj, where Muhammad encountered several angels during his journey through the heavens. Angels have often been featured in Islamic eschatology, theology, and philosophy. They're like angels. The scriptures, the preeminent holy text is the Quran. The verses of the Quran were revealed to Muhammad by God through the archangel Gabriel on multiple occasions between 610 and 632, which is the year that Muhammad died. While Muhammad was alive, these revelations were written down by his companions. Primary method of transmission was oral through memorization. The Quran is divided into 114 chapters containing 6,236 verses. The chronologically earlier chapters revealed that Mecca are concerned primarily with spiritual topics, while the later chapters, oops, here comes Patty. While the later chapters are concerned primarily with with more social and legal issues relevant to the Muslim community. What they kind of leave out of here is he didn't have a lot of success initially when he was in Mecca. So when he went to Medina, he just upped the ante and said, either you go along with me or I'm gonna, chop your head off. And that led to a lot of people signing up and converting. And so
kind of like the Crusades.
Yeah. Well, that's what Charlemagne did when he became Holy Roman Emperor in 800 AD. He went out. He had his minions go out to all the villages, and if you're head of the village, you had to swear allegiance to Jesus Christ and to Charlemagne. And if you didn't, then they just chopped your head off. So Charlemagne had a collection of 4,000 heads.
Oh,
The Muslim jurists consult the hadith, or the accounts, or the written record of Muhammad's life to both supplement the Quran and assist in its interpretation. The science of Quranic commentary and exegesis is known as tafsir, and the Quran is widely regarded as the finest work in Arabic literature and has influenced art in the Arabic language. So Islam holds that God has sent revelations to different prophets numerous times throughout history. However, Islam teaches that parts of the previously revealed scriptures, such as the Torah and the Gospels, have become distorted in their interpretation and their text, or both, while the Quran is viewed as the final, verbatim, and unaltered word of God. So there you go.
Where did we recently hear something about the repetitiveness?
The what?
The repetitiveness of the text. It's because it's kind of, if you understand it properly, it's structured in kind of a spiral. And the recitation is on different levels. As you repeat it, it's not a simple repetition. It's a spiral on a different level. Who was talking
Yeah,
about
I
that?
remember who did that. I don't remember. Let's see if we go through this, maybe it'll come up. When Muhammad was alive, let's see, I already did this.
Yeah.
The prophets are believed to have been chosen by God to preach a divine message. Some of the prophets deliver a new book, and they are called messengers. So Muslims believe prophets are human and not divine. All of the prophets are said to have preached the same basic message of Islam, submission to the will of God, to various nations in the past, and this is said to account for many similarities among religions. The Quran recounts the names of numerous figures considered as prophets in Islam, including Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, among others. And the stories associated with the prophets beyond the Quranic accounts are collected and explored in the stories of the prophets. So the Muslims believe that Muhammad was the final prophet and the seal of the prophet to convey the completed message of Islam. In Islam, the normative example of Muhammad's life is called the Sunnah, literally the trodden path. The Muslims are encouraged to emulate Muhammad's moral behaviors in their daily lives, and the Sunnah is seen as crucial to the guiding interpretation of the Quran. This example is preserved in the traditions known as Hadith, which are accounts of his words, actions, and personal characteristics. I mean, again, these are people that were near him. They claim they were near him, and they heard him say something, do something, whatever it was, and that's what's in the Hadith. It's not really Muhammad. The Quran is Muhammad. The Hadith Qudsi is a subcategory of Hadith regarded as God's verbatim words quoted by Muhammad that are not part of the Quran. So a Hadith involves two elements: a chain of narrators and the actual wording. There are various methodologies to classify the authenticity of the Hadiths, commonly used grading scale being authentic or correct, good or weak. So there you go. You have these things. There's 6 books regarded as the most authentic reports in Sunni Islam, and one of these is considered to be the most authentic source after the Quran. Then in the Shias, they have in their source of hadiths, they have 4 books. So there you go. The key thing is belief in resurrection and judgment. There's a belief in the day of resurrection, and this is crucial for Muslims. Is believe the time of the day of resurrection is preordained by God, but is unknown to man. So it's coming, but we don't know when. The Quran and the Hadith, as well as the commentaries of the scholars, describe the trials and tribulations preceding and during this period, the day of resurrection. The Quran emphasizes bodily resurrection, a break from the pre-Islamic Arabian understanding of death. Muslims believe that all humankind will be judged by their good and bad deeds and consigned to either paradise or hell. The Quran describes this as, so whoever does an atom's weight of good will see it. Whoever does an atom's weight of evil will see it. The Quran lists several sins that condemn a person to hell. The Quran makes it clear that God will forgive the sins of those who repent if he wishes. Good deeds like charity, prayer, and compassion toward animals will be rewarded with entry to heaven. Muslims view heaven as a place of joy and blessings, with Quranic references describing its features. The mystical traditions in Islam place these heavenly delights in the context of an ecstatic awareness of God. And so it goes. There's also divine predestination. There's the concept of divine predestination in Islam, meaning that every matter, good or bad, is believed to have been decreed by God. So it makes you wonder, is there really any free will here? What are we doing? Al-Qadar, meaning power, derives from a root that means to measure or calculate. And the Muslims often express this belief in divine destiny with the phrase, Inshallah, meaning if God wills, when speaking on future events. So it's just an integral part. Now, the one thing about this is the acts of worship are not onerous, and they're really an integral part of daily life. You have the Shahada, the declaration of faith. You do prayers daily 5 times. You have the giving of alms for the poor, for the needy. You have fasting during Ramadan. And then finally, the Hajj, or the pilgrimage to Mecca, that you might do once in your life. And there's other optional acts that are encouraged, but they're not considered to be duties. These are the 5 duties, the 5 pillars. So the declaration of faith, the first one, the Shahada, is an oath declaring belief in Islam. The expanded statement is, I'm just gonna, La ilaha illallahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, which comes out as, I testify there's no deity except God, and I testify that Muhammad is the messenger of God. And this gets translated into all, I believe there is no deity except Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, would be another way people say this. Islam sometimes argued to have a very simple creed, with the Shahada being the premise, the rest of the religion. So non-Muslims or wishing to convert have to recite the Shahada in front of witnesses. Prayer in Islam is seen as a personal communication with God, and there's repeated units called Zakat that include bowing and prostrating to God. There are 5 timed prayers each day that are considered duties. The prayers are recited in Arabic and performed in the direction of Kaaba, which is Mecca. You have to know which way Mecca is when you go to bed. The act requires a state ritual purity achieved by means of either a routine ritual wash, a wudu, or in certain circumstances, a full body wash, which is ritual. A mosque is a place of worship for Muslims, called a masjid. The primary purpose of the mosque is to serve as a place of prayer. It's an important social center. And for example, the Masjid an-Nabawi, the prophetic mosque in Medina in Saudi Arabia, also serves as a shelter for the poor. The minarets or towers used to call the adhan a vocal call to signal prayer time. Yeah, by the way, remember in these cities, as you go into the cities outside the gates, you'll see, for example, heads on spikes or people hung up there, and they've lost an arm, or they're decapitated, and that's just taken for granted. The Romans did the same thing. The Zakat, or the almsgiving, is a type that's characterized by giving 2.5% annually of the accumulated wealth from those who can afford it to help the poor and needy, such as for freeing captives, those in debt, stranded travelers, or just for those who are employed to go collect the alms. So it's really a form of welfare, a religious obligation that the well-off owe the needy, because their wealth is seen as a trust from God's bounty and a purification of one's excess wealth. So the total annual value contributed due to Zakat is 15 times greater than global humanitarian aid donations, using a variety of conservative estimates. Okay, we take all the things that are publicized that the UN does, Red Cross, you name it. This is 15 times greater than all of those put together. It's non-trivial. A waqf is a perpetual charitable trust which finances hospitals and schools in Muslim societies. Fasting precludes food and drink, as well as other forms of consumption such as smoking, and is performed from dawn to sunset. During the month of Ramadan, it is considered a duty to fast. The fast is to encourage a feeling of nearness to God by restraining oneself for God's sake from what is otherwise permissible, and to think of the needy. There are other days, such as the day of Arafah, when fasting is optional. So this is just a key part of life. Finally, we have the pilgrimage. This is the fifth pillar, the Hajj, which is to be done at least once a lifetime by every Muslim who has the means to do so during the Islamic month of Dhu al-Hajj. The rituals of the Hajj mostly imitate the story of the family of Abraham. In Mecca, pilgrims walk 7 times around the Kaaba, which Muslims believe Abraham built as a place of worship. And then they walk 7 times between Mount Sawa and Marwa, recounting the steps of Abraham's wife, Hagar, who was looking for water for her baby Ishmael in the desert before Mecca was developed into a settlement. The pilgrimage also involves spending a day praying and worshiping in the plain of Mount Arafat, as well as symbolically stoning the devil. All Muslim men wear only 2 simple white unstitched pieces of cloth called ihram, intended to bring continuity through generations and uniformity among pilgrims despite class or origin. Another form of this pilgrimage, the Umrah, is optional, can be undertaken at any time of year, and there's other sites of Islamic pilgrimage, such as Medina, where Muhammad died, as well as Jerusalem, a city of many Islamic prophets, and the site of Al-Aqsa, which was the direction of prayer before Mecca. So here we have the supererogatory acts. Muslims recite and memorize whole or parts of the Quran as acts of virtue. The tajweed refers to the set of rules for the proper allocation of the Quran. Many Muslims recite the whole Quran during the month of Ramadan. One who's memorized the whole Quran is called a Hafiz, and the hadiths mention that these individuals will be able to intercede for others on Judgment Day. The supplication to God has its own etiquette, such as raising hands as if begging. The remembrance of God refers to phrases repeated referencing God. Commonly, this includes tamid, declaring praise to be due to God, during prayer or when feeling thankful. Tasbih declaring glory to God during prayer or when in awe of something and saying in the name of God before starting an act, such as eating. So, a little history. Muhammad was born in Mecca in 570, orphaned early in life, grew up as a trader. He was known as the Trusted One and was sought after as an impartial arbitrator. And he later married his employer, a businesswoman. In 610, troubled by the moral decline and idolatry prevalent in Mecca, and seeking seclusion and spiritual contemplation, Muhammad retreated to the cave of Hira in the mountain Jabal al-Nur near Mecca. It was during his time in the cave he is said to receive the first revelation of the Quran from the angel Gabriel. The event of Muhammad's retreat to the cave and subsequent revelation is known as the Night of Power, and is considered a significant event in Islamic history. During the next 22 years of his life, from age 40 onward, Muhammad continued to receive revelations from God, becoming the last or seal of the prophets sent to mankind. During this time, while in Mecca, Muhammad preached first in secret, then in public, imploring his listeners to abandon polytheism and worship one God. Many early converts to Islam were women, the poor, foreigners, and slaves, like the first muezzins, Bilal ibn Rabah al-Habashi. The Meccan elite felt that Muhammad was destabilizing their social order by preaching about one God and giving questionable ideas to the poor and slaves because they profited from the pilgrimage to the idols of the Kaaba. So after 12 years of persecution of Muslims by those in Mecca, Muhammad picked up everything and immigrated in 622 to the current day Medina. And there, with the converts and the Meccan immigrants who came with him, Muhammad in Medina established his political and religious authority. Constitution of Medina was signed by all the tribes of Medina, and this established religious freedoms to use their own laws among Muslim and non-Muslim communities, as well as an agreement to defend Medina from external threats. Now, the Meccan forces and their allies lost against the Muslims at a battle in 624. Then they had another battle. Then they unsuccessfully besieged Medina in 627. In 628, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was signed between Mecca and the Muslims. It was broken by Mecca 2 years later, and then as more tribes converted to Islam, the Meccan trade routes are cut off by the Muslims. So finally, in 629, Muhammad was victorious in the nearly bloodless conquest of Mecca. I wouldn't say it's nearly bloodless, but anyway. By the time of his death in 632, at age 62, he united the tribes of Arabia into a single polity. And this takes us off into this period where things took off, the Golden Age, 800, 900, 1000 AD. Islamic scientific achievements include medicine, mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, physics, economics, engineering, optics. So there was an early pioneer in experimental medicine. His canon of medicine was the standard text in medicine in the Islamic world in Europe for centuries. There was the first to identify a disease, smallpox and measles. Public hospitals at the time issued the first medical diplomas to doctors. There was the father of the modern scientific method, referred to as the world's first true scientist, especially regarding his work in optics. There was the brothers' automatic flute player, which is considered to have been the first programmable machine. There was the concept of the algorithm, named after Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, who is considered a founder of algebra, and which is named after his book, Algebra, A-L-J-B-R, while others developed the concept of a function. So these are huge accomplishments that are all happening here. The government paid the scientists the equivalent salary of professional athletes today. The University of Al-Qarawiyyin founded in 859, is the world's oldest degree-granting university. The oldest one in Europe, I believe, is Bologna, which was like 1200. So it just shows you how far ahead. Many non-Muslims, such as Christian, Jews, and Sabians, contribute to the Islamic civilization in various fields. In the House of Wisdom that employed Christian and Persian scholars. So there was an openness here to having others come in. It wasn't just, us versus everyone else and forcing everyone to convert to become Muslim. It was very much of something that was open, and that's what led to the Ottoman Empire lasting for so long and had so many diverse entities in it that it made it all the way up until World War I, when it collapsed. The largest sect is the Sunni sect. It's a contraction of the phrase al-Sunnah wal Jamaat, which means people of the Sunnah, the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, and the community. So these are the people of the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad and the community. The Sunnis, or the Sunnites, believe the first four caliphs, the rightful successors to Muhammad. There was a whole bunch of people who were slugging it out after Muhammad died, and going this way, that way, the other way. It was not fun. And primarily, they reference 6 major hadith works for legal matters, while one of the 4 traditional schools of jurisprudence, the 4 schools are listed here. So the traditionalist theology is a Sunni school of thought advocated by Ahmad ibn Hanbal, characterized by its adherence to the textual understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah, the belief that the Quran is uncreated and eternal, and opposition to speculative theology called kalam in religious and ethical matters. So you just follow the Quran just exactly as it's written, no deviation. The monotheism is a Sunni school of thought inspired by ancient Greek philosophy, and it asserts that scripture is not needed for basic ethics, that good and evil can be understood by reason alone, and people rely on revelation for matters beyond human comprehension. If they're beyond human comprehension, where would you get them? They have to be revealed to you by someone that's not you. Ash'arism holds that ethics can derive just from the divine revelation, but accepts regions regarding exegetical matters and combines this approach with traditionalist ideas. So this is the Sunni side of things. The Shia side of things, which is the second largest denomination, they split over who Muhammad's successor was. I mentioned there are a bunch of people slugging it out. The Shia believe they must be from certain descendants of Muhammad's family, and they referred to those leaders as imams that have additional spiritual authority. The bulk of the Sunnis don't believe that. Both Sunni and Shia Muslims had a significant event during Muhammad's return from his final pilgrimage to Mecca. Muhammad appointed his cousin Ali as the executor of his last will and testament, as well as his authority. And the Shias recognized Muhammad Ali as his successor and imam after him. But some of the first imams are referred by all Shia groups and Sunnis as Ali. The Twelvers, the first and largest Shia branch, believe in 12 imams, the last of whom went into occultation to return one day. They recognize the prophecy of the 12 imams has been foretold in the hadith of the 12 successors, which is recorded by both the Sunni and the Shia sources. So now we get into the element of mysticism here. In Sufism, there's a mystical ascetic approach Islam that seeks to find a direct personal experience of God. Classical Sufi scholars define tasawwuf as a science whose objective is the reparation of the heart and a turning it away from all else but God through intuitive and emotional faculties that one must be trained to use. I would interpret this to be prayer or meditation. This is not a sect of Islam. Its adherents belong to various Muslim denominations, and the teachings are rooted in Gnosticism and Neoplatonism, as well as in other schools of Islamic philosophy. But these are the most mystical interpretations of Islam here. There was an early Sufi ascetic who was portrayed as one of the earliest Sufis, who emphasized fear of failing God's expectations of obedience. By way of contrast, later prominent Sufis emphasized religiosity based on love toward God, and such devotion would have an impact on the arts, where Rumi arose as one of the best-selling poets even today in America. So the Sufis see this as an inseparable part of Islam. The traditional Sufis, and there's a whole series of them here, argued for Sufism as being based upon the tenets of Islam and the teachings of the Prophet. And a historian argued that Islam in the medieval period was really more or less Sufism. The proper devotional practices, such as the veneration of Sufi saints, have been viewed as innovations from the original religion, from the followers of the Sunni revivalist movement. And they sometimes attacked Sufis, which of course wasn't the best thing to do. We have law and jurisprudence. Sharia, the religious law forming part of the Islamic tradition, which is derived from the religious precepts of Islam, particularly the Quran and Hadith. One of the problems, again, with this is these are laws that were there for a medieval society, and they've been attacked as not being well adapted to the world of today as things changed. And
It varies so much according to which country you're in. Arabic Islam is very, very different from Indian or Pakistani.
yeah,
When I was doing the interfaith work I used to do for the church, I was our representative. They always had this guy come from Pakistan to talk about it because it was such a moderate view. And our, loosely speaking, our Judeo-Christian heritage has a lot of the same ideas. The Crusades were a lot like, Sharia law of, let's say, imposing your religious conclusion on everybody else, and that they're all, heretics who should be put to death if they're not believing and interpreting it exactly as you are, in these religious wars between the three Abrahamic faiths. And I would say they're all equally missing the epiphany myself, but it's hardly only Islam. And in countries like Pakistan, they don't have anywhere near the same limitations for women and things like that, wearing the full body burqa. And on the other hand, I went to meetings in this area of Connecticut. They go to one another's homes because they're afraid to meet in centers. They don't use the word mosque. That's considered a derogatory name by non-Muslims, meaning it's a back formation from mosquitoes, meaning the people dressed in white kind of swarming to their temples are like mosquitoes. So they're going to these mosques. They don't say mosque. They will refer to a masjid as the religious center. In places like Pakistan, they don't have the same dress codes and all of that for anybody. And as they mentioned, Muhammad's mother, or wife, I believe his mother was also
Yeah.
a businesswoman, and a very competent, successful one. And it's not really forbidden in the scripture. That's more of a regional cultural thing.
Yeah. So you have what the Taliban are doing in Afghanistan, or you have in the 60s, a lot of women in Saudi Arabia actually had Western dress
Right.
and were driving cars, and then things changed and they clamped down. That came to an end, and now they're bringing it back in, and so it goes. So in Arabic, the term Sharia refers to God's divine law, and in contrast with fiqh, which refers to its scholarly interpretations. So the manner of application in modern times has been a subject of dispute between the traditionalists and the reformists. The Muslims didn't envision things like credit default swaps and mortgage debentures and other assorted nonsense. The traditional theory of Islamic jurisprudence, there are four sources of Sharia: the Quran, the Sunnah, which is the Hadith and Sirah, the Qiyas, which is analogical reasoning by analogy, and the Ijma, the judicial consensus. So you have four different sources of Sharia. There were different legal schools that developed methodologies for different rulings, and they had their own process. There's traditional jurisprudence with two different branches of laws, those involving rituals and those involving social relations, which comprise a wide range of topics. And it's the rulings that assign actions to one of the five categories. Five categories are mandatory, recommended, permitted, abhorred, and prohibited. So those are the rulings that you get. Forgiveness is much celebrated in Islam in criminal law, while imposing a penalty on an offender in proportion to their offense is considered permissible. Forgiving the offender is even better. To go one step further, by offering a favor to the offender is regarded as the peak of excellence. So compassion and generosity and love for the other person are very much a part of Islam. Some areas of Sharia overlap with the Western notion of law. Others correspond more broadly with living life in accordance with God's will.
But you do see people's hands being cut off for stealing a loaf of bread. So
Oh yeah, no, their heads cut off. They're shortened. So you shorten them. So now we're going to just go off into Sufism, which by itself merits, let's see, why does this thing say, do people see the screen okay?
Yep.
It says your screen sharing is paused.
We see Islam.
Hold on.
we're looking at it saying Sufism.
Hold on.
Hi.
Let me go.
Hi, Patty.
Hi there. How are you?
All right.
I shouldn't. Let me go here. Do you
I
see?
got in on the. Now we see Sufism. My
Good.
apologies, everyone.
No. I had a flag up here. It was there was said there was some problem with screen sharing.
I think
And-
she was going to apologize for something else.
No, just for being late, I got in on a red eye this morning and just went into. It's just been a busy, long day, and I apologize for being late.
No problem.
Okay.
No problem.
So
The Buddha said there's no such thing as late.
right. Sufism. Here we go. Here's some whirling dervishes down here. So this is an expression of joy where you have music and you have your body and you're spinning around and there's this music, and it's an ecstatic religious experience, being a whirling dervish. So here we go. Sufism is a mystical body of religious practice found within Islam, which is characterized by a focus on purification, spirituality, ritualism, asceticism, and esotericism. It's
Asceticism.
esotericism, asceticism. Okay. This is Islamic mysticism, mystical expression of Islamic faith, the inward dimension of Islam, the phenomenon of mystic within Islam, the main manifestation and most important central crystallization of mystical practice in Islam, and the interiorization and intensification of Islamic faith and practice. So in many ways, there are those who would argue that if you're a Christian mystic, you're also a Sufi. If you're an Essene or a Kabbalist in the Judaism, that you're quite close to being a Sufi. All of these things, in some sense, from 50,000 feet, sound similar. There's been a relative decline of the Sufi orders in the modern era, and there's been a lot of revivalist activity, but Sufism is still there and does play an important role, especially in Sunni Islam. It's influenced various forms of spirituality in the West. So that's why we focus on this. This is really many ways the soul of Islam,
so to speak.
Yeah. The practitioners are referred to as Sufis. Historically, they belong to these different orders, congregations formed around a grand wali, who would be the last in a chain of teachers, successive teachers, linked all the way back to Muhammad, with the goal of undergoing self-purification and the hope of reaching Ishan. The ultimate aim of the Sufis is to seek the pleasure of God by endeavoring to return to their original state of purity and natural disposition, known as fitra. It could be that this natural state of purity is what the Buddhists would say is the loss of self. That's what they're aspiring to. Sufism emerged very early in Islamic history, partly because there was a huge amount of materialism there with one of the early caliphates, and there was a lot of pushback for this. So the Sufis were opposed to just being dryly legal. They strictly observed Islamic law. They belonged to the various schools of Islamic jurisprudence and theology. And the overwhelming majority of Sufis, both pre-modern and modern, remain adherents of Sunni Islam, and certain strands of Sunni thought transferred over to the ambits of Shia Islam during the late medieval period. This happened after the conversion of Iran. The important focuses of Sufi worship include the practice of the remembrance of God, and Sufis played an important role in spreading Islam through their missionary and educational activities. The word tasawwuf, literally being or becoming a Sufi, is generally translated as Sufism and commonly defined by Western authors as Islamic mysticism. The Arabic term Sufi has been used in Islamic literature with a wide range of meanings. The classic Sufi texts, which stressed certain teachings and practices of the Quran and the Sunnah, gave definitions of what Sufism is that described ethical and spiritual goals and functioned as teaching tools for their attainment. So many other terms that describe the particular spiritual qualities and roles were used, instead in more practical contexts. So many modern scholars have used other definitions of Sufism, such as the intensification of Islamic faith and practice and the process of realizing ethical and spiritual ideals. The term Sufism was introduced into European languages in the 18th century. So long, 1,000 years after it had been around, and viewed it mainly as an intellectual doctrine. They really didn't understand it. They viewed it as some sort of sterile monotheism part of Islam. What do these camel jockeys really know anyway?
It's really about practice.
It was mistaken as a universal mysticism in contrast to the legalistic Orthodox Islam. And there's been arguments that in the medieval period, Sufism and Islam are more or less the same, which got missed by the Western Europeans, of course. In modern scholarly usage, it just encompasses a wide range of social, cultural, political, and religious phenomena that are associated with Sufis. So the original meaning of Sufi seems to have been one who wears wool, which is Suf. So if you have Suf, then you're a Sufi. And there are other etymological hypotheses which are untenable. Woolen clothes were traditionally associated with ascetics and mystics. But several of these rejected all possibilities other than Suf on linguistic grounds. Another explanation traces the lexical root to the word safa, which in Arabic means purity, and in this context, another similar idea considered in Islam is tazikah, meaning self-purification, which is also widely used in Sufism. So these two explanations, when combined by the Sufi al-Rubhabar, Ari, who said the Sufi is the one who wears wool on top of purity. So there you
I want to point out that tazika is a lot like the Hebrew word tzaddik, which is very close to a saint or a mystic.
right. Others suggested they came from the people of the Sufa or the bench, who were impoverished companions of Muhammad, or things like this. So these men and women who were there were considered to be the first Sufis. The current consensus is that Sufism emerged in the Hijaz and has existed as a practice of Muslims from the earliest days, even before there were sectarian divides. I mean, there always were these poor people. And so it goes. So the Sufi orders are based on the bayah, or the pledge that was given to Muhammad by Shahada. Pledging allegiance to Muhammad, the Sahaba committed themselves to the service of God. And verily, those who give bayah, the pledge, to you, O Muhammad, they are giving bayah, the pledge, to God. The hand of God is over their heads. Then whosoever breaks his pledge breaks it only to his own harm. Whoever fulfills what he has covenanted with God, he will bestow on him a great reward. This is out of the Quran. The Sufis believe by giving bayah, or pledging allegiance to a legitimate Sufi, one is pledging allegiance to Muhammad. And so a spiritual connection between the seeker and Muhammad is established. It's through Muhammad that Sufis aim to learn about, understand, and connect with God. Ali is regarded as one of the major figures among the Sahaba who directly pledged allegiance to Muhammad. Sufis maintain that through Ali, knowledge about Muhammad and a connection with Muhammad may be attained. Such a concept may be understood by the Hadith, which the Sufis regard to be authentic, in which Muhammad said, "I am the city of knowledge, and Ali is its gate." And so it goes. During the lifetime of Muhammad, some companions were more inclined to others to intense devotion, pious abstention, and pondering the divine mysteries, more than Islam required. And this ended up with these having a founding figure who worked in the science of purifying the heart. So this would be the equivalent of a Buddhist monk or a Christian monk or a Jewish mystic in a scene, or Kabbalah. The practitioners of Sufism hold that its early stage of development, Sufism effectively referred to nothing more than the internalization of Islam toward making this an integral part of you. According to one perspective, it's directly from the Quran, constantly recited, meditated, and experienced that Sufism proceeded in its origin and its development. But other practitioners have held Sufism as a strict emulation of the way of Muhammad, through which the heart's connection to the divine is strengthened.
Well, the Muslims that I used to do interfaith work with emphasize that they didn't have any real differences in belief, the Sufis and the Muslims, where I would say the Kabbalists do and Christian mystics do
Mhm.
with mainstream religions.
Right.
And that anybody really practicing Islam, if they're really doing it, that they're praying at least 5 times a day, they're having regular mystical experiences. It's an everyday part of the religion. It's intended to stimulate that. It's supposed to be part of the experience of practicing Islam. Where I don't think that's really true of modern day Christianity or Judaism.
No. Now, the other side, remember, is we talked about Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, and those are an integral part of daily life in Asia, in Eastern Asia. It's just they can't conceive of not practicing some of those things every day.
And it's an experience of unity, really.
Yeah. So the later developments of Sufism, early Sufism was known for its strict adherence to the Sunnah. It was reported that this one person refused to eat a watermelon because he did not find any proof that Muhammad ever ate it. And according to the late medieval mystic, the Persian poet Jami, he was the first person to be called a Sufi, and that was already in 716, was when he died. The term had a strong connection with Kufa, with 3 of the earliest scholars to be called as Sufis, and then there were later individuals. So it really got rolling from the get-go with Islam. Historically, Sufis have often belonged to orders known as Tariqa. These are congregations formed around a grand master wali who will trace their teachings through a chain of successive teachers back to Muhammad. And within
You to show.
what do you want to do?
I want you to show.
Okay.
Since you're talking.
Within the Sufi tradition, the formation of these orders did not immediately produce lineages of masters and disciples. There were a few examples before the 11th century of complete lineages going back to Muhammad, but the symbolic importance was immense. They provided a channel of divine authority through master-disciple chains. It was through such chains of masters that spiritual power and blessings are transmitted to both general and special devotees. I know our yoga instructor makes it a point. She's a teacher of yoga teachers and she's taught hundreds of yoga teachers, but she always makes a point of pointing out that her mentor was so-and-so, who's part of this chain of yogis that practiced yogi, what it means to do yoga. And And that's and each of these other teachers that they've seen over the years, they all have their own chains too. So it's a very important thing. It's not something to be taken lightly. There's a perfection of worship that is detailed in the Hadith. The idea is to worship Allah as you see him. If you can't see him, surely he sees you. And the Sufis regarded Muhammad as the complete human who personified the attributes of absolute reality and view him as their ultimate spiritual guide. So the Sufi orders trace most of the original precepts from Muhammad all the way back, with a notable exception of one order who goes in a different route. But the point is that this is really an important thing. Sufism is almost equal to Islam in general, but it's not limited to specific orders. Sufism had a long history before the subsequent institutionalization of the Sufi teachings in the Middle Ages, and the term Tariqa is used for the school or order of Sufism, especially the mystical teaching and mystical spiritual practices of such an order, with the aim of seeking the ultimate truth. So the ultimate truth has a guide who plays the role of the leader or spiritual director. The members or followers are known as the muridin, meaning desirous. They're desiring the knowledge of knowing God and loving God. And they've been influenced by various movements. Like everything else, they're human. So there are these social aspects to it, which led to all kinds of things. Again, Sufism is not a distinct sect. It's actually exists in both Sunni and Shia Islam, but it's a method of approaching or a way of understanding the religion, which strives to take the regular practice of the religion to the supererogatory level through simultaneously fulfilling the obligatory religious duties, the prayer 5 times a day, so forth, and then finding a way and a means of striking a route through the narrow gate and the depth of the soul out into the domain of the pure, arid, unimprisonable spirit, which itself opens out onto the divinity. So academic studies of Sufism confirm that Sufism is frequently a product of Western Orientalism and modern Islamic fundamentalists, which may or may not be true. As a mystic and an ascetic aspect of Islam, it's considered the part of Islamic teaching that deals with the purification of the inner self. By focusing on the more spiritual aspects of religion, the Sufis strive to obtain direct experience of God, making use of the intuitive and emotional faculties that must be trained to use. And the science of the soul has always been an integral part of Orthodox Islam. The Sufis are those who belong to the path of the Sunnah and represent it in their teachings and writings. There's a commentary here where this one individual has a huge reverence for the Sufis and so forth, but it views it as absolutely essential within the life of any sort of Islamic community, and the primacy of the Sharia forms the soundest tradition. To argue this point, lists over a dozen earlier masters, etc., that were along the way here. And so that was his particular axe to grind. The doctrine in the 11th century became codified. So Sufism been around from 600 AD. It's now 400, 500 years later, and it really hadn't been codified. And so there was a big push to do so. And this led to these orders, which have continued until the present day. And there are a number of these different orders that are all listed here. but contrary to popular perception in the West, neither the founders of these orders nor their followers ever considered themselves to be anything other than Orthodox Sunni Muslims. And in fact, all of these orders were attached to one of the 4 Orthodox legal schools of Sunni Islam, and so forth. This is very different than, there's probably 100 sects in Christianity when you go look, and you have all kinds of things happening there that are really unique to this sect. Some of them are very, if you will, anti-Christian, and you actually look at what they're doing. But it's a very different. Islam is very homogeneous. It's not at all what has happened in what we call Christianity today. The growth of Sufism really became an important part of Islam, and it just spread like wildfire, and was integral to everything. All of these different tribes here they talk about in Libya and in Sudan are very strong adherents of Sufism, and there are a number of Sufi poets and philosophers, not just Rumi but other ones, that really helped to spread Islamic culture all around the Mediterranean and going off into Persia and so forth, Indonesia today. There was a intellectual culture, a renaissance. There's a lot of physical artifacts that are still there. There's a gathering place for Sufi adepts, which you might think of as a monastery, but it also was a lodging for those that are just seeking knowledge. And there was a whole series of endowments to pay for the buildings, like the mosque, this blue mosque in Istanbul. When we went to Istanbul in 2000, the blue mosque was next door to the hotel. So at 4 a.m. call for prayer, whether you wanted it or not. And they had some big loudspeakers to make sure you didn't sleep through it. So anyway, a lot of support for the needy, a lot of hospices, kitchens, food kitchens, hospitals, just a lot of respect to make sure that those that didn't have really had something that those that had shared with them. The opposition to Sufi started in the 18th century with a variety of very militant people, but then there was a lot of just criticism today in the 20th century, and ideological attacks that took place. But Sufism and Sufi orders continue to still play a major role in the Muslim world today. That even with all of these things trying to rip it apart, take it down, it's still doing very well. Some people see Sufism as an essential extra dimension of Islam alongside the disciplines of jurisprudence and theology. So you pick this up in Egypt, for example. The Sunni orthodoxy being one of these 4 different schools that we talked about, and so forth. But there's a lot of Sufi orders that we listed them here, and we have Turkey and Persia have a lot of Sufi lineages and orders, and of course we have Indonesia that we just touched on. It has the largest in numbers population of Muslims of any country on earth, and so forth. So and there's a lot of activity in Africa, a lot of activity. So
I learned a couple of years ago that that's one reason that in America so many African American prisoners in our jails are converted to Islam, it's because it's considered actually like a natural African religion, which was a complete surprise to me. But they feel they're kind of reverting to their African, it doesn't have to be, I forget what they're called, the African faiths, and some of them are voodoo based. It does, to them, it's a natural African religion. And that's why so many of them become adherents.
It could be. All Muslims believe they're on the pathway to Allah, and after death and after the last judgment, the Sufis believe it's possible to draw closer to God, more fully embrace the divine presence in this life. The chief aim of all Sufis is to seek the pleasure of God, working to restore within themselves this primordial state of oneness, of loss of self. To the Sufis, the outer law consists of rules pertaining to worships, transactions, marriage, judicial rulings, the Qanan. The inner law of Sufism consists of the rules about repentance from sin, the purging of contemptible qualities and evil traits, characters and adornment with all the virtues and good characters. So for the Sufi, it's the transmission of divine light from the teacher's heart to the heart of the student, rather than the worldly knowledge that allows the adept to progress. They believe the teacher should attempt inerrantly to follow the divine law. One of the most important doctrines of Sufism is this concept of the perfect man. This doctrine states there will always exist upon earth a pole or axis of the universe, a man who is the perfect channel of grace from God to man, and in a state of sanctity, being under the protection of Allah. So the concept of the Sufi is similar to that of the Imam. However, this belief puts Sufism in direct conflict with Shia Islam, since both the Qutb, who for most Sufi orders is the head of the order, and the Imam fulfill the role of the purveyor or spiritual guidance of Allah's grace to mankind. So the vow of obedience taken by the Sufis is considered incompatible with devotion to the Imam. Well, there you have it. As a further example, there's another order that was ordered to serve in the conditions of a hospice for the poor for 1,001 days prior to being accepted for spiritual instruction, and a further 1,001 days in solitary retreat as a precondition for completing that instruction. Okay, these are just things. Also we have the 1,001 what is it, nights, the tales of 1,001 nights that the woman explained to the caliph so she wouldn't get killed. So some teachers, when addressing more general audiences, make extensive use of parable, allegory, and metaphor. And this varies among different Sufi orders, but it's widely used. We have many Sufis believe that to reach the highest level of success, you have to live and serve with a teacher for a long period of time. There's the folk story of this person who gave his name to his order. He's believed to have served his first teacher for 20 years until that teacher died. He then served several other teachers for lengthy periods of time. They all died. He's said to have helped the poorer members of the community for many years. And after this concluded, his teacher directed him to care for the animals who were cleaning their wounds, and he assisted them. The devotion to Muhammad is the strongest practice within Sufism. Sufis have historically revered Muhammad, the prime personality of spiritual greatness. The Sufi poet Shirazi states, "He who would choose a path contrary to that of the prophet shall never reach the destination. O Sa'adi, do not think that one can treat that way of purity except in the wake of the chosen one. And Rumi attributes his self-control and abstinence from worldly desire as qualities attained by him through the guidance of Muhammad. Rumi states, I sewed my 2 eyes shut from desires for this world and the next. This I learned from Muhammad. So Ibn Arabi regards Muhammad as the greatest man. Muhammad's wisdom is unique because he is the most perfect existing creature of this human species. This region, the command began with him and was sealed with him. He was the prophet while Adam was between water and clay. His elemental structure is the seal of the prophets. He praised Muhammad in such a manner that was not done before by any poet in his book of poems. Someone else said Muhammad is the exemplar to both worlds, the guide of the descendants of Adam, the sun of creation, the moon of the celestial sphere, the all-seeing eye, the 7 heavens, and the 8 gardens of paradise were created for him. He's both the eye and the light in the light of our eyes. And so it goes. Islam is the best religion because of Muhammad. There's the belief that it's God's attributes and names are manifested in this world, and that the most complete and perfect display of these divine virtues and names are seen in Muhammad. That one may see God in the mirror of Muhammad, meaning the divine attributes of God are manifested through Muhammad, and Muhammad is the best proof of God. By knowing Muhammad, one knows God. The Sufis followed the Sharia, as do all Muslims, Arab, so forth. When we see someone in this community who claims to be able to guide others to God, but is remiss in but one rule of the sacred law, even if he manifests miracles that stagger the mind, his shortcoming is a special dispensation for him, is what he says. We not even bother to look at him, for he's not speaking the truth. And no one is to entrust him with the secrets of God Most High. And this is more on the Islamic law. The devotional practices are the ritual prayer 5 times daily, the fast at Ramadan. You have to be grounded in these supererogatory practices known from the life of Muhammad, such as the Sunnah prayers. There's a famous hadith Qudsi, my servant draws near to me through nothing I love more than that which I have made obligatory for him. My servant never ceases drawing near to me through supererogatory works until I love him. Then when I love him, I am his hearing through which he hears, his sight through which he sees, his hand through which he grasps, and his foot through which he walks. So very, what did I do here?
Click on one of those.
There we go. Sorry about that.
The disciples refer to it as being fully surrendered. My second astrology teacher, I think I've mentioned, was a Quaker as well as a Sufi. And I studied with her in New York. And she said if her Sufi master told her to, not marry somebody or to marry somebody, she would. And he wanted her to get rid of most of her esoteric library. And so I was the grateful recipient of a lot of that, her, so-called Western occult books she gave to me. And I don't know why a lot of books, maybe they weren't forbidden, but on things like, that just went blank. the group in Scotland that do the gardening, what are they called?
Scotland.
Yeah,
Oh, I know who you mean. Yeah,
Findhorn, Findhorn.
yeah.
And so I got like, boxes of books from her in New York. And so I went to some talks and things, but I just knew I was never gonna be fully surrendered to a master. So I didn't really pursue it. But the older I get, the more I can see life makes a little sense anyway. That sometimes I think, oh, that could be appealing. And she said that it was this very deep trust that she knew he would never require her to do anything that was really against her soul and not for her highest good. And she met a man that she married after around 30 years of not being involved in any relationship, and I was close behind her when Bart and I got together. We were Facebook friends for a while, but I dropped out of Facebook. But she was extremely happy, extremely happy. And I watched her go through an extremely difficult time with her eldest daughter, who was a terrible rebel. And she was absolutely, they're both pacifists, the Sufis and the Quakers. And she was just absolutely pacifistic with her daughter. But she did eventually make her leave the house and then lived in a big loft in downtown Manhattan. And her daughter came around and ended up coming back to the Quaker faith and marrying another Quaker in their congregation, and she became a social worker and an artist, which her mother had been earlier. So it was very interesting to me, but I just didn't ever think I could actually follow it.
Sure.
But I don't think that for the people who do, I think it's liberating. And I knew it doesn't feel like a constriction, it feels like a liberation. And I had very interesting conversations with, they weren't Sufi, but they were just regular Muslim women. And some of them found the burqa to be very liberating, to not have men looking at them and evaluating them all the time. They felt that it was more dignified and they had more privacy. They weren't so preoccupied with what they were going to wear every day and being judged, and that was an inward kind of liberation for them, which you wouldn't think. But they felt sorry for women who felt they had to run around in miniskirts all the time to be, in revealing clothes, to being judged by men and being, kind of evaluated as pieces of meat, that they felt sorry for those women the way I think a lot of American women feel sorry for them having to walk around in these. It's almost like a nun's habit that they wear. So it's really interesting to me that things that can seem so confining from the outside can feel very freeing from the inside.
So that's what leads into what we have actually here on this slide. The seeker has to turn away from the sins, the love of this world, the love of company and renown, the obedience to satanic impulse, the promptings of the lower self, all of which you need the Sufi master to train you in. You must be trained to prevent the corruption of those good deeds which have accrued to your credit by overcoming the traps of ostentation, pride, arrogance, envy, and the long hopes, meaning the hope for a long life, allowing us to mend our ways later rather than immediately here and now. So The Sufi practices, while attractive to some, are not a means for gaining knowledge. The traditional scholars of Sufism hold that axiomatic knowledge of God is not a psychological state generated through breath control, like we pick up in yoga, for example, but also in just Christian prayer practices. The practice of the techniques is not the cause, but the occasion for such knowledge to be obtained, given proper prerequisites and proper guidance by a master. And the emphasis on the practices may obscure a far more important fact. The seeker is in sense to become a broken person, stripped of all habits through the practice of solitude, silence, sleeplessness, and hunger. So there you have what it means to be a Sufi. The remembrance of Allah with these names is an activity that the Muslims all maintain. There's nothing special to it about Sufism. The practices of meditation are really all the same. Here's one of these. He used to collect all of his bodily senses in concentration, cut himself off from all preoccupation and notions that inflict themselves upon the heart, and thus he's to turn his full consciousness toward God Most High, while saying 3 times, my God, you are my God, and your good pleasure is what I seek. Then he brings to his heart the name of the essence, Allah, and as it courses through his heart, he remains attentive to its meaning, which is essence without likeness. The seeker remains aware that he is present, watchful, encompassing of all, and thereby exemplifying the meaning of his saying, may God bless him and grant him peace. Worship God as though you see him, for if you do not see him, he sees you. And likewise, in the prophetic tradition, the most favored level of faith is to know that God is witness over you wherever you may be.
I think, I want to say, I think they are also aware that they are deliberately and artificially and consciously creating a personification of God in order to relate to it, that they don't really believe in. They believe in a unity, and that one of their La ilaha illallah, there is no God but God. That means that there is nothing but God. And that's, I think, an essential quality of mysticism, that it's all God. There's no not God.
Right.
But in order to work with it, to pray to it, we conceive of it as a usually a hymn, but it's really beyond gender and it's beyond individuality. And they know that, but that's just too abstract to really relate to. And they want you to really cultivate a real relationship.
Right. No, that's a good point. The Sufis came up with these whirling dervishes. The whirling or the Sufi spinning is a form of physically active meditation. The Sufi dervishes, the Mevlevi order, practice this. It's a customary dance where the dervishes aim to reach the source of all perfection. This is sought through abandoning one's egos or personal desires by listening to the music, focusing on God, and spinning one's body in repetitive circles, which has been seen as a symbolic imitation of planets in the solar system orbiting the sun. The camel's hair hat represents the tombstone of the ego. The wide white skirt represents the ego's shroud, and you take off your black cloak, so you're spiritually reborn to the truth. When the dance starts, holding your arms crosswise, the dancer appears to represent the number 1, testifying to God's unity. Then when you start whirling, your arms open up Your right arm is directed to the sky, reaching to God's beneficence. The left hand, upon which his eyes are fastened, is turned toward the earth, and the dancer conveys God's spiritual gift to those who are witnessing all this. Revolving from right to left around the heart, the dancer embraces all humanity with love. Human being has been created with love in order to love. And the Rumi says, all loves are bridged to divine love, yet those who have not had a taste of it do not know. There's these two branches of Sufism, just to close things out here. The signs of the signifier, or the arts to the artisans, that's one order. The seeker begins by purifying the lower self of every corrupting influence that stands in the way of recognizing all of creation as the work of God, as God's active self-disclosure. And so this is the majority of the Sufi orders, but there are also some that deal with the artisan and his works. And in this branch, the seeker experiences divine attraction and is able to enter the order with a glimpse of its endpoint of direct apprehension of the divine presence toward which all spiritual striving is directed. This does not replace the striving to purify the heart, as in the other branch. It simply stems from a different point of entry into the path. And there are several orders that follow this. There's a third branch that some scholars picked up on, which is much more strict adherence to the ways of Muhammad. There's other contributions by Sufis in psychology, and a lot of thought has been given to Sufi cosmology and Sufi metaphysics, but I couldn't find a lot of stuff on that, so it goes. But they clearly attracted a lot of very capable people. The 10th century Persian Al-Biruni, in his critical study of Indian speech, discusses the similarity of some Sufism concepts with some aspects of Hinduism, things such as reincarnation and so forth. And other scholars have compared the Sufi concept to the Buddhist Eightfold Way. There was an Iranian mystic who looked at Hinduism with regard to Sufism and felt that there was a lot of overlap there, and so it goes. There was a lot of discussion over Sufism influencing Jewish philosophy and ethics. There's some sections which actually try to compare these things in different ways. And Abraham Maimonides, the son of the Jewish philosopher Maimonides, believed that Sufi practices and doctrines continue the tradition of the biblical prophets. So his principal work here dealt with this sort of exposition, and the followers of this path, which they called Hasidism, not to be confused with the later, what we know as Jewish Hasidic movement today, practice spiritual retreat, solitude, fasting, and sleep deprivation. And the Jewish Sufis maintain their own brotherhood, just like there was a Sufi sheikh.
The guy who created the Dances of Universal Peace was an American Jewish Sufi,
Right.
Shirag, named Samuel Lewis. And he was also a Universalist. Our Unitarian religion merged with the Universalists, so we're now the Unitarian Universalists in the early 60s, and I'd love to do a unit on him
Sure.
and bring the dances back to our congregation and, maybe have a little more introduction and teaching.
Sure.
But they were brought to us by, there were two different groups of Sufis, one from New York and one from Cambridge and Boston. And they were practically at war. You would think they were the, Shiites and the Sunnis
Sure.
several years ago, but they worked at creating a bridge
Mhm.
and working together and recognizing one another's paths. So that was interesting to see that kind of piecework going on around us when they were coming down. They started coming down in the mid 2000s. And then when
2005.
around then,
Hmm.
maybe a little later, 7. And then with when the market really collapsed, everything kind of folded.
Sure.
But I'd love to get them coming back and
Hmm.
talking more about it.
So the one Sufi that comes up again and again is Rumi, who was a 13th century poet, and his works were mostly in Persian, but he occasionally wrote in Turkish, Arabic, and Greek. And he's considered to be one of the greatest poets of the Persian language. But he crossed all these borders: Iranians, Afghans, Tajiks, Turks, Kurds, Greeks, Central Asian, South Asia, have all appreciated Rumi, and he's one of the best-selling poets in the United States. So the thing that's interesting to me about this was he was just a jurist and a scholar going through life, and all of a sudden, in the middle of his life, everything completely changed. He was transformed into an ascetic. There were shams that had traveled throughout the Middle East searching and praying for someone who could endure my company, and a voice said to him, "What will you give in return?" And Shams replied, "My head." And the voice then said, "The one you seek is this person." And so on that night, Rumi and Shams were talking, and Shams called to the back door. He went out and was never seen again. Apparently, he might have been murdered. But because of his love for and his bereavement at the death of Shams, he dropped everything and became, a Sufi mystic. Why should I seek? I am the same as he. His essence speaks through me. I have been looking for myself. Okay, this is very much, Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus, achieving enlightenment. It just happened all of a sudden with Rumi. So he loved music, poetry, and dance as a way to reach God, and his teachings became the base for this whole order that his son organized. And you always are turning toward the truth, growing through love, abandoning the ego, finding the truth, and arriving at what is the perfect. And you then return from the spiritual journey with greater maturity and love to the service of the whole of creation, without discrimination in regard to beliefs, races, classes, and nations. So very, the Islamic side of things has always been very open to anything. And there you go. That is what we have for tonight. Islam, and a little aside on Sufism.
I think all the mystics agree deep down.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on YouTube, for example, about Rumi, and of course on Islam too, that we've actually put on the IslamAlephTalks website, so you can take a look at that.
And the Hafiz was an amazing poet too.
Yeah.
And there's some wonderful translation going on these days. So really is a very nice effort. I think it's affected American poetry a lot. There she is. Where did you fly back from, Patty?
I was in Oregon.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah, it was a great trip. And a long day, so.
Yeah, a long
Sure.
trip. You're coming
Yeah.
back uphill.
You just have to sleep faster.
Yeah, that's right. This is another one of those, I don't know enough about Islam. I think it's hard for all of us to see what's going on in the world, and
But the press doesn't do us any favors, so.
No. They're deliberately distorting it.
You know,
and
Go ahead.
what were you gonna say?
Well, I worked at a job for about 12 years, and about 80 of those years, one of the fellow employees was a Muslim. She was a lovely lady. We became incredibly good friends. And the only thing that was noticeable is that she did prayers all the time.
Yeah, lunchtime, yeah, did she have her mat with her, or rug?
No, she didn't. She sometimes she kind of she had something. I can't remember what it was. But one thing she did every day was do prayers. But about the negative things that are happening about Muslims, her view is that they're just criminals. They're
Yeah,
not
well,
not real
they're-
Muslims. They're criminals.
Yeah, they're the ones that get the notoriety, so the press plays up on it, but there's the other, 99.9%, they're perfectly good people.
Yeah.
It's like judging Christians by the people who are blowing up abortion clinics,
Yeah,
I would say that's a case of missing the epiphany,
It was a
right.
good quick overview, and you can't help but see the parallels between even just Christianity. It's just somehow there's this natural human tendency to say, this one is the person. This one is the person. I had a Christian minister recently say to me, well, I do believe that Jesus was the divine Son of God, but I also believe that your Jewish ancestors can be in what we would consider heaven. It's like saying the sky is blue, even if the clouds are
Right.
away. That might be a truth. But if you don't see it, it doesn't keep it from being the truth. So different people just have that sense of what is truth and who is the path. It sounds like there's an awful lot of good. There's so many Muslims in the world. And like you just said, Marjorie, they're good people. They're not Hamas.
Right.
We-
But Hamas also has done a lot of good over there.
Yeah,
you
for their
know,
people,
where
yeah.
where it's needed. You
Yeah.
know, just like in this country, what were they? The
Black Panthers?
Black Panthers did a lot of good for their community there. It may be an unfortunate, boiling over that goes on, but there's a need for it. The same with the mafia. In Italy, or Sicily, they were doing a lot of good that was needed. And our police really came out of gangs, Irish gangs, here in this, and I assume it's the same in Canada. And for them over there, the Crusades are very fresh. That's not ancient history. Where these marauding Christians were coming in to slaughter everybody who wouldn't convert. But where did that have anything to do with Jesus? You know, where did he say that's what anybody should do? Kill people who don't want to follow, no, no. And that's very, very fresh for them. They still feel hurt by it. They still feel that it was a terrible wrong, and they feel they really love Jesus. They see him as the lineage of prophets. They see him as a prophet. They see Muhammad as a prophet. They don't see him as an embodiment of God any more than anybody else. We're all embodiments of the divine.
But it did sound like, if you are Muslim, Muhammad is the prophet.
Well, he's the
most-
latest. He's the last. So he's
The last and like, and
So
there will
he's
never be
supposed to-
another, and there will never be another one, and then we're gonna have a day of judgment and we'll just see, right?
Well, that's, it's easy to say that, but it doesn't mean that, 2,000 years from now, there won't be another, incredibly enlightened individual that, is leading the way.
We'll have Bruce Almighty. Didn't they make a movie about that, Bruce?
What?
right. This movie, right. It was oh, what's his name? Oh, what was his name? The comedian.
Yeah.
Jim
Jim Carrey.
Jim Carrey, yeah, thank you. Yeah, Bruce Almighty or Almighty Bruce.
The
Yeah.
more you learn, it can be very it can be upsetting. Humans can be really difficult.
Right.
Yep.
And I think it's the fundamentalism that's the worst. Whatever sect of fundamentalism it's reflecting, and I think fundamentalist atheists can be really misguided too. Although there are a lot of people who worship science as, the greatest evolution of human thinking, and that can be just as dogmatic and just as inhuman and inhumane.
Napoleon, when he was emperor in 1800, he asked Laplace, who was a great astronomer, could you explain to me, all about this gravitation and how everything works? And so Laplace is going through all this, and Napoleon says, well, what happened to God? And Laplace said, well, I don't have any need for God.
There does seem to be a need in some of all that we've been looking at of okay, there's a judgment and there's, you're either gonna, there's heaven, there's hell. And so you better have followed all the rules and done what you were supposed to do. And it's just so fear-based. I just.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I went to university, I took my major was political science, my minor was sociology. And so I look at the Middle East, there had to be a political social movement where they had to have one God outside of your experience who judged you. Like and there's free will and punishment and all that stuff. Whereas, for example, in Buddhism, that sort of idea doesn't exist at all.
Right.
I see it as a kind of psychological truth, and that when you're in a real state of separation from the oneness, it is a kind of hell, but it's here and now. And when you feel connected and you're not completely ego-based and addicted to acquisition and things like that, it's much closer to heaven anyway. But I think it's a psychological truth in the here and now, and it's just kind of a natural consequence. It's not some being pointing a finger and, you know, I seems to me that deeper people like, oh, what was the woman that she traveled around the world healing the sick.
You mean like Mother Teresa?
Yeah, Mother Teresa. I just go blank. He's starting to read my mind where I can't, getting the Vulcan mind meld going. I think it's the way she believed, and that they might have used metaphors to talk about it, but I don't think they really believed these stories about heaven and hell and salvation and, damnation. I don't think somebody like her could really believe that in her heart, that you would have to adhere to this path and these teachings. What kind of a God would it be? It certainly wouldn't be an all-merciful God that would, condemn you to eternal damnation for simply not recognizing him as, I think a lot of it came
no
out
notion of compassion.
right, and forgiveness. And I think a lot of it came out of oligarchy. I think it's like this idea of one king, one emperor.
It's a good way to control people.
Yeah,
If you don't do this, this is what's going to happen.
right.
Yeah.
And either the nice Santa Claus is going to save you, or the big bad king is going to get you. And it's this male entity that's going to reward you or punish you. And
I mean, there wasn't a lot in that discussion, and I suppose it's another whole aspect of the whole martyrdom, and like if you need to go out and kill people in the name of Allah, because it's in there under, a religious.
It was there early on after when he really got rolling, when he went to Medina, then these armies were formed, in 650, 700 AD, and they just went sweeping through North Africa and through Turkey and, just demolished everything in sight. And it was, like I said, it was only in 732 AD at the Battle of Tours, or this Charles Martel and the forces of Christianity held them off. Otherwise, it would have gone right through France and into Germany and across the English Channel. Nothing would have stopped them.
but again, the Crusades had the same agenda, to make everybody Christian.
Yeah, that was
But by the sword, I mean, I don't know how that's Christian.
it's not Christian. It's
It's
the
Roman.
Roman Catholic side of
Right.
things. You should convert everyone to be a Roman Catholic, but really?
It's Roman. It's not.
Yeah. In fact, just after the Council of Nicaea, I always felt that that Christianity was the religion of the empire, they looked around at the empire and said, hey, we've got a lot of good machinery here. We can set up provinces, and we can set up, bishops and archbishops, and and then they had a group of 12 archbishops that basically controlled the whole Mediterranean. One of them was the Archbishop of Rome. And so they went out there and they just started demolishing all of the pagan shrines, the Roman shrines that were there everywhere. That was where they burned down the library in Alexandria
Right.
in 392.
And if that isn't a crime against humanity, I don't know what is.
They just wanted to turn everything into what was quote unquote Christian, and destroy any opposition whatsoever, which of course was nothing like what Jesus said. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. and have compassion.
Turn the other cheek.
Yeah, just totally missing the whole point. And so this Council of 12, they ended up having the more and more fights, obviously. And finally, the Archbishop of Rome, said, well, I'm in Rome and you're not in Rome, you're in these other cities. And so I'm going to call all the shots. And so the other 11 excommunicated the Archbishop of Rome. And then the Archbishop of Rome returned the favor by excommunicating the other 11, which led to the Eastern, side of things.
The Eastern Rite Church.
Yeah.
It
makes no
as I
sense.
said, for the Islamic world, that's very recent history. It's not really over yet either.
Yeah, the first crusade was really against the Cathars in southern France, where the Pope teamed up with the King of France because they were both broke, and the Cathars had all this money.
Right.
And so they said, good, we'll go on in and just kill them all and take all the money and we'll split it. And that was the first crusade, and that was where the Inquisition was created. Was for that. And they went out of their way to make sure that every last Cathar they could find was dead. When they went into the very first city, one of the lieutenants asked the general, how do we tell the Cathars from the normal people? He says, oh, don't worry about it, kill them all, God will sort it out. This is the mindset you're up against. And then only then later did they go to the Holy Land. After that, that was where they shook down everything so they could have a crusade. So then they said, now we're going to go, back to Palestine and do our thing there.
But they were also, furthering all this colonization of, the rest of the world. And, a lot of it was about the gold. The Aztecs had all these gold, amulets and everything. But to them, it was a sacred metal. It was a symbol of God. And they didn't hoard it and kill each other over it. I mean, they had other ways of killing each other and everything, but that was a big part of it. That's a big part of the church's
Well, what happened
conquering of the world
was that Columbus came back and reported about this new world, and so the Spanish started sending ships there, and there were actually some Spanish that said, "My God, these natives are here, and we can't just go ahead and kill them and take their gold, okay?" And other Spanish said, "Oh, yes, we can. That's exactly what we're going to do." So of course they got the Pope involved. And this is in 1493. This is not, and the Pope was Borgia, and Borgia is the worst of all of the popes. He became Pope by buying the College of Cardinals. He just bought every vote so that he could become Pope. And then he proceeded to have orgies like on the altar in St. Peter's. You can imagine what happened there, and so forth. So he came out with this proclamation, okay, and the Spanish would go there in their ships in 1494, and they would lean over the edge of the bow of the ship, and there'd be maybe some natives in boats there, looking at them because they'd never seen ships like this before, and they'd be reading to them.
But there were prophecies that they would come.
Yeah, they were reading to them in Spanish. Oh, we're here from Spain, and you're heathen. And so we're here to have you become good Christians. Of course, if you don't, we'll just kill you. We'll sell you into slavery. We're going to take all your gold anyway. And they're reading all this in Spanish. Of course, the natives don't have a clue what these Spaniards are saying.
But they've been
they would do this.
so they have a choice.
Yeah, they were just doing this, and it's all with the blessing of the Pope and on and on. It was so sick. And then many of them died. There are estimates that there were tens of millions of natives that died of the diseases from Western Europe.
Sure.
It's far greater than the Holocaust. in World War II. Not even close. What happened there, but anyway.
And the way we're taught history, it's kind of like it was basically empty here,
Yeah,
you know?
it was empty after the plague went through.
Yeah. Well, on that happy note, thank you for the
No, we'll let everybody go. This is it.
review of
Have a good.
history.
We will see you next week. I have to go look and see what we're doing, but
Bye-bye.
this is it. Enjoy.
you,
Have a good
Bruce.
weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Be happy.